Year of Learning by Dr. Paul Koningsberg in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuben ben Labish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nisan Nissen ben Fardosa. Paul and Bob Bromberg in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avrameir ben Shimon, Cheryl Schur, and children and grandchildren in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva. Also, a week of learning sponsored by Sam and Shifra Coleman in memory of his mother, Sarah Rachel Bas Avraham, by Lala and Siggy Bessler in memory of her mother, Brendel Bas Yechid. Today is the 21st, a day of learning by Elaine and Harold Rinn in memory of her mother, Bela Bat Yitzchak Yehuda, by Sandy and Barbara Cohen in memory of his father, Eliyahu ben Yaakov Koppel HaKohen, by Silke Coleman in memory of her father, Yaakov Yehosef ben Yerachmiel HaKohen, and by B. Warden in memory of her father-in-law, Shlomo ben Yitzchak Halevi. May the Neshamas have an aliyah, Krank Rafia, Velti Yashir, Shema Taliyah, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael, a good Geben Shtiar.
Amen.
Okay. All right. Today is Wednesday, the 21st of October. A month from tomorrow, we will be finishing up our current Gemara of Eruvin, so we'll need to start giving maybe a little thought to some ideas about Asiyum. Okay. Whether we, right? Now, however, let's go to Ayin Gimel, right? Amud Aleph, right? That's our page for today. Okay, and remember we were discussing, in a sense, a combined, I'll say a combination of issues. Issue or aspect number one is, from what product could you make appropriately the Eruv Chatzerot or the Shituf Mebuot? Was it better to make it from bread or better to make it from wine? Okay. But that served as a basis for a stronger item to look at, namely, what was the criteria, okay, for saying that one's residence was there in the Chatzer? Was it that one ate in that location or that one slept in that location? Okay? And we finished up our discussion with this machloket that we found at the bottom of Ayin Bet Amud Beis and the top of Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. Okay? Where we saw the last line, okay, of Ayin Bet Amud Beis asks the question, or basically said, Beit Dira Sakada'atach, Ela Ema Makom Dira, the place where the person dwelled. Mai Makom Dira, what do we mean by the place of residence? Rav Amar, and this brought us over now to Ayin Gimel, Makom Pita. According to Rav, we said it was the place where the person had bread. It was where they ate. Ushmuel Amar Makom Lina. And Shmuel said it was the place where they slept. And that's where we basically stopped yesterday. So we did not come to a conclusion on that. And that's where the Gemara is now going to pick up with this Braita that challenges, okay, with the following. Meitive, says the Gemara, Haroim, those who are shepherds, Vahakit kaitzim, those who are fig watchers, Vahaburganim, and we might call those who are guards. They live in guard huts. V'shomrei perot, and those who will watch the fields for fruit. Bisman shedarkan lalin ba'ir, at the time, says this Braita, that their normal pattern is to sleep, to spend the night in the city. Harei hein ke'anshei ha'ir, they are considered like people of the city. And if they're like a resident of the city, okay, then that is their tchum of 2,000 amma, okay, from the city limits. Okay. Bisman shedarkan, right? Lalin basadeh, says the Gemara Braita. But if they are usually sleep out in the field, so to speak, okay, yesh lahem alpayim lekol ruach, that according to the Braita, they have 2,000 amos in every direction from that specific location. So Gemara proceeds, Hatam anu sahade. Here, he says, in that case, we are like witnesses. We can give testimony, attest. De'i memtu laho rifta hatam, that were it such that one to bring their bread, in other words, their food there, okay, to the place where they slept, tfei nechelaho, okay, it would be better than for them, which would seem to imply then that eating and not sleeping is the important criteria. Okay. However, the Gemara now proceeds and tells us the following. Amar Rav Yosef, says Rav Yosef, lo shamir li hashmata. I have never learned or heard that particular statement of Rav. Okay. And what happens? We know Rav Yosef had been ill and forgot some of his learning. As a result, his student Abaye comes often to his rescue. Amar le Abaye, Abaye said to him, Ha amart lahelim. Okay, you basically told us to go forward on this idea, on this Mishnah. V'aha amart nehalim. And on this, you basically told us the following. Ha'achim shahayu ochlin al shulchan avihem, those brothers who ate at the table of their father, v'yeshenim bevatehem, however they sleep in their own homes, tzrichin iruv lekol echad ve'echad. They must have an eruv for each one, which would again seem to imply that eating was the important criteria, okay? Or less so. Or rather, if they eat at their father's table, but they sleep in their separate homes, this disagrees with that Braita instead and says that they still bring and each have their own eruv, so that sleeping location is the criteria. Va'amrin lach, and we said to you then, Shma mina makom lina gorein, that this seems to imply then that the place where they sleep is the important criteria. That determines the residence. V'amart lan Allah, and then, okay, you further said, okay, about this issue. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, says Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav, b'mekablei pras shanu. Okay, that this was a situation where the brothers received a portion, okay, or support from their father. Namely, they did not actually eat in the house, but he gave them a share of the crop, or he gave them sustenance. And therefore, in that case, since they didn't really eat by their father, but did sleep in their own houses, that would be the implication. Again, that sleeping was the criteria. Now, the Braita, however, is going to be presented. Okay? And it gives us a sort of spin on this issue. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Braita. Mi sheyesh lo chamesh nashim. Okay? One who has 5 wives. Kenahara. Right? Mekablot pras mi ba'alehen. Each wife receives a portion. In other words, sees her foodstuffs and things like that, her support from her husband. Okay. Now, this is again, the implication is one husband. V'chamisha avadim mikablim pras mi rabbehem. And 5 servants receive their support, their portions from their master, one master. Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera matir benashim. Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera would say, okay, that in this case, he's matir benashim. In other words, what it means is that women living in that chatzer, okay, they do not limit other Jews from carrying in that chatzer. V'oser ba'avadim. But Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera prohibits regarding the servants, that servants living in that chatzer, okay, would prohibit, would restrict, okay? Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, on the other hand, matir ba'avadim, he permits, okay, with regards to the servants, okay, he takes the opposite view, that others in the chatzer are not limited, okay, in that regard for carrying. V'oser benashim, but women, okay, those women that would restrict anyone else in terms of carrying in the courtyard. Now, so the Gemara picks up and raises the following, okay? Namely, Amar Rav, says Rav, Mai Tama de Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. What's the reasoning behind the position of Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba? Okay. Dechtiv, why? Because it's written in a pasuk in the book of Daniel, V'Daniel Batra Malka, that the Daniel, so to speak, followed after the king. The implication is really he served the king. In other words, he was a gate of the king. He basically had the authority of the king behind him as a servant. Pshita, that's obvious. Ben Eitzel Aviv, Kida Amram. That's similar to a situation of a father, okay, a son who associated has the authority of his father, as we've said. Isha Eitzel Ba'ala, or the situation of a woman with her husband. Ve'eved Eitzel Rabbo, and a servant, therefore, by his master. In other words, all of them are under the authority of another individual, benefit from that authority, and therefore receive their support from that authority. Okay. Now, that could be the reasoning. And the Gemara tells us, Plugta de Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera, or Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. Okay? And this is the essence of the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera and Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. However, the Gemara raises now a question. Talmid Eitzel Rabbo Mai. What about you? You gave the examples. Father, son and father, wife and husband, servant and master. What about the example of student or disciple and teacher? What is that? So the Gemara picks up and gives us a braita now. Tashma. Listen to the following braita. It tells us. Okay, namely, the Rav Bey Rabbi Chia Amar. That Rav, while he was still a student in the academy of Rabbi Chia, said as follows: Ein anu trichin la'arev. We, the students, do not have to make or join in the eruv. Shaharei anu somchin al shulchano shel Rabbi Chia, because we rely on the table, if you will. In other words, we're supported by Rabbi Chia because we apparently eat at his residence. Okay? The Rabbi Chia be Rabbi Amar, and Rabbi Chia himself, while a student in the academy of Rebbe, also said, Ein anu tzrichin la'arev. We do not have to join in an eruv. Why? Shaharei anu somchin al shulchano shel Rebbe. That we rely on the support, the table of Rebbe for support. Now, Gemara wants to clarify, has this really given us the answer of that eating takes precedent as the criteria for a dwelling as opposed to sleeping? Bai mine Abaye mi Rabba. Okay, so Abaye now asks the following shaila to Rabba: Chamisha shegavu et eruvan. Okay, there are 5 individuals who are residents of the same chatzer. They've collected the foodstuffs to make a eruv. Keshemolechin et eruvan lemakom acher. Okay, when they move, transport their eruv to another place. Okay, to join with it, what happens? Eruv echad lekulan. Do we say that they only need a single eruv for all of them? Otzrichin eruv lekol echad ve'echad. Or do they need an eruv for each and every one, a separate eruv for each one? Amar le. Okay, so we see an answer now. Okay, by Rabbah. Eruv echad lekulan. He says that there is one eruv for all of them. But Abaye responds, V'ha'achim dechigavu damu. But in regards to the example of the brothers, okay, that collect together, isn't it similar to that? Ukatani trichin eruv lekol echad ve'echad. And there the Braita taught that we need an eruv for each and every one. Okay, that's why we thought maybe sleeping was the place of sleep, was the criteria, and not necessarily eating. Okay, because they each slept in separate locations, their own homes. Hacha b'may yaskinen. What are we talking about? Says the Gemara. Kigon de'ika diurin b'hadayhu. It's a situation where there are other people that also live, other residents that live in the chatzer. Okay, the migo dahani asrei, since it's possible, okay, that these other people can prohibit them from these brothers from carrying in the chatzer. Hani nami asrei, okay, they too, okay, can restrict one another from carrying. Hachi nami mistabra, and this seems fairly logical, right? The katani, why? Because our text taught ematai bezman shemolichin et eruvan b'makom acher, at the time that they were transporting the eruv to another place. Aval im haya eruvan ba'etzlam, but if the eruv was going to come to them, okay, it was to be in their chatzer. Oh, she'en diurin imahen b'chatzer, or there are no other residents in that same chatzer. Ein tzrichin la'arev. They do not need to make an eruv. Shma mina. Indeed, that's what we learn from this. new question. By mine Rav Chia bar Avin mi Rav Sheshet. Rav Chia bar Avin asks Rav Sheshet the following shaila. Right? B'nei Bei Rav da'achle nahama b'ba'aga. Okay? We have the B'nei Bei Rav, the students of the academy, okay, of the yeshiva, okay, and they eat their bread. In other words, they get their food. The word ba'aga means a valley or a field, but in other words, it means outside the place where they're sleeping. Okay, va'atu, and then they come, ubaite b'bei Rav, and then they come and they sleep in the house of the Rebbe. Okay, so what place serves as their residence? Ki mishchinan, when we measure, okay, laho tchuma, when we want to measure for these students what their tchum Shabbat is going to be, mi bei Rav mishchinan laho, do we measure it from the house of the Rebbe where they sleep, or mi ba'aga mishchinan laho, or do we measure it from the place, valley, field, in other words, the other, whatever it is, where they eat? Is that where they measure it from? So what do we consider their residence for Shabbat? Again, the same question. Yeah.
Yeah, all along I thought we talked about an Eruv. We're talking about an Eruv Chatzer or something for carrying. Now we're shifted to Eruv Techumim. Is that what has happened, or did I miss something?
No, we're talking Chatzeros.
The Gemara sort of, I don't want to say jumps from one to another, but it's clear that sometimes it's dealing with one, it's some dealing with the other, because you have the common factor of having put the food together.
Right.
And number two, the question still exists, whether it's an Erev Chatzeros or an Erev Tchumim, of what is the essential residence. What's the criteria for a residence? Okay?
Right.
Because it's going to impact them either in carrying within that Chatzer, or how far they can carry outside up to the limit of the Tchum, 2,000 amos.
Okay.
Good question. Okay. So that's where we said. Now, Amarle, okay, he responded, okay, to him, Mashchinan mi beirav, that we measure from the place where they're sleeping, the house of the Rav. V'hareno tain et eruvo, betoch alpayim amma, okay, and therefore we, in a sense, extend to them their eruv of 2,000 amma from that location. Va'ate ubait b'veite, and then they come and they sleep in their homes. The mashchinan le tchuma me'eruve, right? And we mention and we measure their tchum Shabbos from his eruv, okay, from that situation. Okay, from the location of his eruv. Now, bahahu anan sahade, ubahada anan sahade. In this case, we can testify, attest, and in this case, here too, we can testify. Bahahu anan sahade. In this case, in other words, one example we can testify, de'i mitrad le hatam nechale. That if we can say, right, that if it was such that if they were to be sleeping there, that would be better for them, right, or better for him, really. Ubahada anan sahade, and in the other situation, we can also testify, attest, de'imaitu laho rifta lebeirav, that if that's where they're sleeping and people brought their food for the students to the house of the Rebbe where they're sleeping, Nechelahot fe. It would be better for them. Okay. Now, given that, we now go to another topic. By Rami Bar Chama. By Rami Bar Chama, he's asking me Rav Chisda. Av ubno, father and son. Harav v'talmido, the teacher and his student. Kirabim damu, o kiyechidim damu. Do we say that they are considered like a single unit, or do we say that they are individuals? Tzrichin eruv or ein tzrichin eruv, right? Do they each need an eruv or they don't need it, right? Mabui shalahen, okay, nitar belechi v'kore. Do we say then that if they want a shituf mebuot to be able to carry from their chatzer into the adjoining alleyway, okay, do we say it's going to be sufficient to set up either a cross beam, okay, or a side post, right? Or ein nitar belechi v'kora, or they're not permitted to carry into the alleyway, okay, using either a side post or a cross beam. Amarle, he responded to him, Tini Tua. We learned this, Av Ubno, okay? We learned in terms of that, okay, that a father and son, okay, Harav v'talmido, or the rabbi and his disciple, the Bisman she'ein imahen diurim, at the time, we said, when there are no other residents, right? Harehen ki yechidim, they're considered like individuals, okay? Ve'ein tzrichim la'arev, okay? And they need not join in an eruv, another, right? Umabui shalahen nitar belechi v'kora, okay? And they're being able to carry out into the neighboring alleyway is permitted through using either a lechi, a side post, or a korah, or the crossbeam. Okay. Now we're going to get to a new situation with this new Mishnah. All right, as we move along, we're going to see, and before we jump into the Mishnah, if you're using Art Scroll, look at 73A3, okay, the diagram under note number 32, okay? You can see there that we have a situation where we have 5 separate courtyards. However, they each open one to another, but they also open into a mabui, into a alleyway, right? Okay. So looking at that diagram, we now can appreciate the Mishnah. Chamesh chatzerot petuchot zo lezo. We have 5 courtyards, one opening into another. Upetuchot lemabui. And they also, each courtyard, okay, also opens into the alleyway. Irvu b'chatzerot. Let's assume that they made an eruv in their individual chatzer, an individual courtyard. Velo nishtatfu b'mavui, but they did not, okay, make a shituf mabuot to carry out into the alleyway. Mutarin b'chatzerot, says the Mishnah, they are permitted to carry in the courtyard. Va'asurin b'mabui, and they are forbidden to carry out into the alleyway. Now, certainly makes sense that they can carry in their own chatzir. Okay. However, one item we need to think about: does this then tell us that they may carry from one chatzir into another. Okay, is that what Tanakama here is telling us? Let's see. Let's go on. Right? On top of Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. Okay, Ve'im nishtatfu b'mabui, and the Mishnah, however, tells us now that if they participated in a shituf mavuot, mutarin kan v'kan, they are permitted then to carry both here, namely in the chatzer, and kan, and in the mabui. Okay. Now, next part of the Mishnah. Irvu b'chatzerot v'nishtatfu b'mabui. Okay, let's assume, okay, that they join together in the courtyards, right? And they also join together for a shituf mabuot. V'shechach echad mi b'nei chatzer, and what happens is one of the members of one of the courtyards forgot, v'lo irev, and he didn't join in that courtyard's eruv chatzerot. Mutarin kan v'kan. That individual is still permitted to carry both in his chatzer and in that mabui. Right? Now, mi b'nei mabui, we've got to jump back now and say, v'shachach echad mi b'nei mabui v'lo nishtatef. If one of them happened to forget, okay, who was living off that alleyway and didn't participate in the shituf mabuot, mutarin b'chatzerot, he's permitted to carry in his chatzer, v'asurin b'mabui, but he is forbidden to carry out into the alleyway. Shehamabui lechatzerot kechatzer lebatim, because we have a parallel that tells us the way the alleyway is to the courtyards, so the courtyard is to the residences. Now, Gemara asks the following: Mani, according to whom is this Mishnah? Rabbi Meir he. It seems to be according to Rabbi Meir. Why? Da'amar, who says, Ba'inan eruv u'ba'inan shituf. Rabbi Meir, who says there, okay, based on the middle section of the Mishnah, right, that we need both an eruv, okay, and we also require a shituf, right, that we require both. Right. Now, ema mitziata. So I would therefore say that the middle section of the Mishnah, okay, it seems to say the following: Ve'im nishtatfu b'mabui mutarin kan v'kan. Okay, that if one participates in a shituf mabui, one is permitted to carry both in the chatzer and in the mabui, which would seem to say that only the shituf takes precedent, and therefore you don't need both, which disagrees with Rabbi Meir, right? So the Gemara says, Eta'an l'Rabbanan. If that's the case, then that middle section of the Mishnah seems to be based on the rabbis. The Amre Bechada Sagya, because they say one is sufficient. Right? Ha lo kasha. Here, however, says the Gemara, this doesn't have to be a difficulty. Ve'im nishtatfu nami ka'amar. Why? Because we can say here that if they did the shituf as well, okay, that's why they're permitted in both. Okay, so that doesn't necessarily negate the view of Rabbi Meir. Ema Sefer. But I would say, wait a second. What about the end of the Mishnah? There it says, Irvu b'chatzerot v'nishtatfu b'mabui, that if they join together in the courtyards and they merge together with the alleyway, v'shachach echad mibnei chatzer, and one who lived in one of the courtyards forgot, v'lo irev, and he didn't join in the eruv, mutarin kan v'kan, is permitted both to carry into the courtyard and carry into the alleyway. Hechidami, how is that possible? Idlo batil, if the person did not relinquish his rights. Amai mutarin, why are they permitted? Ela pshita de batil, but it must be obvious then that the person relinquished their rights. However, says the Gemara, Ema Sefer. I would say, however, look again at the end of the Mishnah. Shachach echad mi b'nei mabui v'lo nishtatfu. If one of the individuals lived off that alleyway, forgot, and didn't participate in the shituf mabuot, mutarin b'chatzerot v'asurin b'mabui. He's permitted to carry in his chatzer, but forbidden to carry out into the alleyway. Ve'id batil, and if you say that the person relinquished his rights, amai asurin b'mabui, why then is he forbidden? Okay, why is it forbidden then for others to carry in the into the alleyway? V'chitema kasava Rabbi Meir ein bitul reshut b'mabui. And if you're going to say that Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that there is no relinquishing of rights in regards to the, let's say, status of shituf mabuot, v'hatanya, but isn't it taught elsewhere in a Braita? Shaharei bitel lachem reshuto, divrei Rabbi Meir. That how here someone has relinquished his rights, giving it over to, his permission to others. That's the view of Rabbi Meir. Ela pshita de lo bitel. Okay? But rather we say it must be obvious that this last example of the Mishnah, is where the person did not relinquish rights. Umi de sefer de lo bitel, and since the end of the Mishnah implies the person did not relinquish rights, Reishanami de lo bitel, then the beginning of the Mishnah also must be that the person did not relinquish rights.
Right. So why is
because
it
we
okay?
said the middle was according to the rabbis and not according to Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir must be consistent both at the end of the Mishnah as well as the beginning of the Mishnah.
Right.
Reisha v'sefer Rabbi Meir, Metziata Rabbanan. This leads us right at the moment to the conclusion that the first and end parts of the Mishnah are according to Rabbi Meir. The middle part seems to be according to the rabbis. Gemara, however, challenges that thought. Kula Rabbi Meir. We might, however, argue that the entire Mishnah is according to Rabbi Meir. Right? Kula Rabbi Meir. Tama Mai. And what's the reasoning? Amar Rabbi Meir. Why? Because Rabbi Meir clearly says, Ba'inan Eruv Ba'inan Shituf. That Rabbi Meir holds that we both need both to have Eruv Chatzerot and the Shituf Mabuot. Why? Shelo Lishkach Torat Eruv Men Hatinakot. So that children will not forget the practice, the status of establishing Eruv. Vahacha, Kivan deruba irvu lo mishtakacha. And since the majority, in this case, of people, Rabbi Meir is being lenient, because since the majority of the people did join in an Eruv, and only one person, so to speak, forgot, okay, we can say he may be lenient in this situation, and his criteria of not forgetting is satisfied. Now, let's go on. Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda is going to suggest a slightly different approach to the Mishnah. Rav lo tani ptuchot zolazo. He says, in regards to this Mishnah, Rav did not teach it such that the language of the Mishnah told us that the courtyards opened one to another. V'chein amar Rav Kahana. And likewise said Rav Kahana. Rav lo tani ptuchot zolazo. That Rav Kahana also said that Rav did not teach this Mishnah in the manner that said that the courtyards were open one to another. Ika da amri. And there are those, however, who say it as follows. Rav Kahana gufe lo tani ptuchot zolazo. That Rav Kahana himself didn't teach it, that they were open one to another. Amar le Abaye the Rav Yosef. And so now, okay, we see the following, okay, that Abaye is questioning Rav Yosef. Ma'itama delotani ptuchot zolazo. What would be the reasoning that they did not teach this Mishnah, that with the language that said that the courtyards opened one to another? Kasava kol shituf she'ein machniso umotzio derech petachim b'mabui lav shmei shituf. It may be that they are of the opinion that any shituf mabuot, where one cannot, so to speak, bring in and take out through the openings of the, in other words, to go from the courtyard out to the alleyway or back from the alleyway into the courtyard, okay? If you're not able to do that, it is not considered a valid shituf. ATV. But we're going to challenge this with the following braita. Baal habayit shahaya shutaf l'shchenav lezeh b'yayin u'lezeh b'yayin ein srichin la'arev. Okay, a resident of, okay, who normally would be involved in a shituf mabuot with one of his neighbors, each of them using wine, okay, does not have to make an Eruv Chatzerot. Hatam da'afke va'ayle, says the Gemara. All right? Namely, what are we saying there? Okay? That this is because the wine can be brought in and taken out, okay, of each of the courtyards by means of the mabui, ATV. But now we'll challenge this explanation from another text. Ketzad mishtatfin b'mabui v'chui. How does one, so to speak, participate, merge into the shituf for the mabui? Hatam nami da'afke va'ayle. There too, we can answer that the Mishnah is dealing with a situation where they take out and bring in, okay, to each chatzer through the alleyway. Matkifla Rabba Bar Chana. But this is challenged by Rabba Bar Chana. Elamei Ata. But if that's the case, he says, okay, if now, okay, Hakna Lo pat besalo, if one wants to acquire, okay, or is going to transfer, okay, in other words, be part of the eruv or part of the shituf, using bread in his basket. Hachanami de lo havi shituf. Does this mean then that it's not going to be considered a valid shituf mabuot? V'chitema hachanami. And if you're going to say this as well, indeed, Vaha amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav. But didn't Rav Yehuda say in the name of Rav, B'nei chavura shahayu mesubim, that if you have people, okay, a group of people, right, and they're sitting around and they're eating, right, mesubim, all right, v'kadesh alehen hayom, namely, they're gathered Friday afternoon, okay, and as they're eating, Shabbat is starting. Hapat she'al hashulchan somchin alei mishum eruv, that they can rely on whatever bread that's still on the table to act as their eruv. Va'amre la mishum shituf, okay, and they also say that this may also be relied upon as a shituf.
That's right.
Va'amar Rabba, and Rabba then says in regards to this, lo pligi, okay, that there's no argument here. Kan b'mesubin b'bayit, kan b'mesubin b'chatzer. The difference is one case they're gathered eating inside of the house, right? And that's where the bread on the table can act as the eruv for the chatzer. Kan b'mesubin b'chatzer, and there they're eating out in the courtyard, okay, and that's how that bread can act, okay, as the shituf for the mabui. Elatama derav, the kasavar, ein mabui niter b'lechi v'kora, ad shehiyu batim v'chatzerot petuchim l'tocho. But Rav, who said this authority, held to another view, okay? His explanation that the two versions, that they didn't disagree, was because it only worked to have the Eruv Chatzerot, or the Shituf Maba'ot, okay? So long as we say, right? Okay, that there were other individuals, other residents there, okay? That there had to be other houses in Chatzerot opening to it, right? Savar ein mabui netar b'lechi v'kora, ad sheyu batim v'chatzerot p'tuchim l'tocho, okay? That it wasn't sufficient to put up just a korah or a lechi. There had to be others people. Now the Gemara, and we'll just roll over a tiny bit, is going to want to examine in detail that statement, Gufa. Clearly it says as follows, okay? Going back to the text. Amar Rav ein mabui nitar b'lechi v'kora. He said that a mabui is not rendered permissible, right? Simply by either, okay, using the lechi or korah, okay? And we get, at least on 73b3, a picture of the example of the mabui and the korah at the Rishus Harabim there. Okay. Ad shehiyu batim v'chatzerot petuchin l'tocho. We said unless there are other houses and the courtyards opening to it. Ushmuel amar afilu bayit echad v'chatzer echad. And Shmuel says, even if there's only one house, okay? So that's important. And, okay, and maybe that house doesn't have a courtyard. V'chatzer achat, or only one courtyard. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar, afilu churva. And Rabbi Yochanan says, even if it's a ruin, okay, on one side, okay, and the open up to it, that is sufficient. And that's where we're going to stop today. All right, we'll pick up tomorrow, not only trying to explore Rabbi Yochanan's view, okay, but again, what is clearly the criteria, because we're going to come back to this basic issue of what is a residence. How do we determine what the residence is? Okay, as I said, we'll stop there. Everybody take care and stay well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.